There once was this family. They lived in a small African village. There was a mother, father, son, and a daughter. Well, sadly, the father grew ill, and on his deathbed, he asked the children, "Which would you rather have, my property or my blessing?" The son right away jumped in and said, "Father, I want your property." And the daughter, being a sweet little thing, said, "Just your blessing, father, that's all I need." So they each got what they wanted, and sadly, 7 days later, the mother grew ill of the same thing. And she said also, "Children, which would you rather have, my property or my blessing?" Again, the son jumped in. "I want your property, all of your property." And the daughter, again, "Just your blessing." Well, the next day, they each got what they wanted. The son, he left, went to a nearby village, took all of his property except a pot and a mortar that he had left for his sister so she could make food. So he was over in his own life, and here she was. But sadly, she didn't have any corn or anything to actually make food. She just had the pot and the mortar. This is when her blessing came in handy. All of the women in the village had cracked pots that day, and they all needed a pot to borrow. Well, hers was in pristine condition. So they made a deal. They said, "If you let us borrow your pot, we will repay you in our food that we make." This was perfect. She got free food for just letting him borrow her stuff, and she became friends with all the women in the town. It was awesome. Well, this went on for quite some time. She actually grew to be a little portly. Well, the jealous brother, he heard about this across town in his other village. He wouldn't have this. So, one night, he crept into her little hut, and he stole her pot and her mortar. And when she awoke the next day, all she could think was, a thief must have stolen this. She would have never suspected her brother to do such a thing. So, there she was, left with nothing. What could she do? She walked around the village just thinking to herself, what could she do next? Luckily, she came upon this little seed. It was hiding in the corner. She brought it back to her hut, and she planted it in the little creek next to her place. In the next couple of days, it sprouted up, and all of these vines started growing, these huge, wonderful vines. And upon the vines, these pumpkins. They were giant. They were amazing, delectable. She had never tasted such a delicious pumpkin. And everyone in the village heard about this. They wanted some pumpkins. So they traded her for goods and food. And it worked out perfect. She didn't have to do much work, and she got all this wonderful stuff. Well, the brother, he heard about this, and he was not excited. So he came over in a fit of rage, and he told her, "You didn't work for any of these pumpkins. They do not belong to you. I'm going to rip the vines out of the ground." And before he could, she threw herself upon the vines and said, "No, no, no! Cut off my hand if you're going to do this. I will not let you to these vines." He was a jealous guy, and he cut off her hand right to get to the roots. And there she was, left with no hand. And he ripped out all of the vines, and he took all of the pumpkins. She was left with nothing. And he even said, "You, leave, get out of the village, go. I don't want to see you here anymore." So the poor girl wandered into the jungle with only one hand, and she was so upset, so terribly upset. She climbed into a tree, and she just laid there. And she cried and cried and cried. She didn't know what to do. Well, a prince was hunting the next day, and he heard her tears. And he said, "Girl, come down. Why are you crying? Why are you so sad? It's a wonderful day." Reluctantly, she climbed down the tree because she was hungry. And he saw her, and right upon seeing her, he fell in love. Instantly. She was a beautiful girl. And he loved her. He wanted to be with her, even though she only had one hand. So he decided to take her home to the castle and introduce her to his parents, the king and queen. And they loved her too. Like I said, she had a great personality. So there they were, all happy and wonderful. And after their marriage, she actually got pregnant and gave birth to a sweet little boy. He was just as cute and sweet as ever. Well, the brother, he heard about this, and he was so upset. How could she have done this? How could she have gotten such a wonderful life? So in his jealousy, he set out to go to the castle. And, luckily, I guess for him, the prince had went away, and he was fighting in a war and a few towns over, so he was going to be gone for quite some time. So the brother came up to the parents, and he told them that girl, she was a witch in the village he was from. And in her witchery, she killed the old prince. And what were they to do? They were so scared and upset. They believed him that she was a witch. They didn't want to kill her, but what could they do but just shun her away? They didn't want her there anymore. They didn't want their prince dying. So she was shunned out, told to go into the jungle and find her own life, without the prince even knowing. So, again, she walked sad and alone in the jungle with just her little baby boy to keep her company. And she cried and cried and cried. Upon hearing her cries, this little snake slithered up into a tree, and he said, "Hey, why are you so sad, girl?" And she said, "Well, but I only have one hand, and I've just been kicked out of the only family I've really loved." He said, "Come back to my family. We have food and warmth and all these wonderful things." Well, what was she to do? She really had nothing. So she went back with the snake, and it turned out it was quite a lovely family. They gave her fruit and vegetables and delicate sweet meats. It was great. They were so kind to her, so generous. They became the best little family ever. So one day, her and her little boy and the little snake were out walking in the woods, the big woods of the jungle, and they see this pond. And it was a hot day, so the snake said, "Hey, girl, you and that little boy should go on a swim, 'cause it's really hot." So she said, "Sure, why not? Let's do this." So she gets into the pond and is playing with her little boy, and they're having a great time splashing around. All of a sudden, she hears something. She turns, and poof, the boy is gone. Where could he have gone? She feared for the worst. She thought he must have drowned. The snake said, "You just reach around in that water and you'll find him." So she's reaching with her one hand, and she can't feel anything but the roots and all the vines that grow in the water. She says, "Snake, snake, but I can't feel him. I can only find all these other things." And he said, "Put your other hand in there." Well, she was a little reluctant because it was just a nub. But she put it in, and she reached around. And sure enough, with her little nub, she felt something squishy and soft. It was her boy's skin. She could tell. And so she reached down to scoop him up, and as she did, a hand grew. And there she lifted up her son, and she had a new hand. It was amazing. What a wonderful experience. She was so happy and filled with joy, and the snake he was just delighted. He was dancing and so happy. So, with her newfound confidence, her new hand, and her baby, she thought, "I need to go back and be with that prince," because she loved him. She wanted to be with him. So she said goodbye to the snake, and he let her be, and there she went, walking through the jungle back to the castle. And as she approached the castle, she saw her brother, and she knew he was no good. She had that feeling. So she snuck through the corridors, and she found the prince, her husband, and she told him everything. She told him all about how her brother had cut off her hand and shunned her away. And that's when the brother knew that something had gone wrong and that the king and queen had been lied to. So they all went down together, and they told the story. And the king and the queen, they wanted to kill that brother. They couldn't stand him, that he could do such a terrible thing to such a wonderful girl. But instead she said, no, let's just shun him out like he did to me so many times. Let's get rid of him and tell him to find his own life. So that's what they did. And as they watched him walk away, they were so happy together, and they ended up living happily ever after.